Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Quest Rewind, the podcast where we like to reminisce about video games and consoles of the past. My name is Ryan, and welcome to another episode. Joining me today is Mr. Keith Hamilton from London, Ontario, Canada. Keith, how you doing?
Oh, I am doing wonderfully, but I've got this voice inside my head that keeps screaming, "You died! You died! You are dead! Defeated." And I guess out of context, that sounds really horrible and really like morbid and dark, but it has to do with what we're talking about today.
Yeah, luckily there is a context to that because we're going to be talking about...
Yeah, I don't need to see a psychiatrist, at least not for this reason.
Because we're talking about FromSoftware. Most recently, they came out with the game that everybody is talking about, and that's Elden Ring. But there is a storied history with FromSoftware, but we're going to be focusing mostly, almost entirely, basically entirely on the Souls-like genre that they created. And we can talk a little bit about maybe where they got some of that inspiration from, as well as just walking through a little bit of each game, starting with 2009's Demon's Souls. But
have you ever heard the phrase that, like, at first it was a hot line and then it became a hot song? Like, that's kind of what the Souls series is at this point. Like, Elden Ring is that hot song, and oh my god, it is fantastic. We will for sure talk about Elden Ring probably at obscene length. Maybe have its own episode, you never know. But the Souls series is just this hit after hit after hit after hit that eventually got us to Elden Ring. And it's something that has a very special place in my heart because it's just like, it's this magical discovery, both like in my life and as a game that led me down this path. And there's really nothing like it. And yeah, I think it's a great topic for us to dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the best way to start is to really paint the landscape of 2009 and what games were like then. And this little game called Demon's Souls comes out, and it doesn't...
Make sure you say it right.
Yeah.
Demon's Souls. Two S's.
Yeah, just the ridiculousness of that in and of its own. It's demons... and it's their souls. So these demons have...
the souls of demons.
They have possessed multiple souls. The way it's worded, it seems like each demon has multiples. I don't know. Anyway, you don't want to stare at it too long because your brain starts to melt. But 2009, a lot of games, I would say, were very much... you play through the story... and that's it, right? I think a game that perfectly encapsulated it, and there's nothing wrong with this game, is in 2009, we also got Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, one of the most celebrated games from that era. And it was very much a game that you're expected to just play through that game and complete it. And if someone said, "Hey, I beat Uncharted 2, you're like, "Oh, awesome. What'd you think of the story?" Not, "Wow, you beat Uncharted 2. I can't believe you were able to do that." That was kind of the expected way things were in that time, where games used to be a lot more challenging and it was an accomplishment to beat them. During this time, it was much more about you wanted to experience the story, the action, the set pieces.
Exactly. Yeah, like when you think about 2009, we're pretty deep into the Xbox 360, PS3 life cycle. So you've got all of these developers that are finally encapsulating on the promise of cinematic video games, this very hand-holdy experience where they can take you on a ride like Uncharted and put you in these obscene scenarios that are just, they're crazy to look at. Like, for most of video games' life up until that point, it was just the promise of that. You have all of these awesome looking things on the PS1, but it still kind of looked like a low-res video game because it was. And once we finally got to the Xbox 360 console generation, people could finally deliver on that. You could have these amazing experiences like your Uncharted 2s, like your Batmans, like your Call of Duties, and developers really leaned into that at that point. And hey, those are all great games in their own right, but then up in the corner here, you got this little weird game from FromSoftware, Demon's Souls, that looked at all of those experiences and were like, no thanks. We got something else for you.
Yeah, I think with games as they've evolved through the years, we got more quality of life things to just make things more convenient, where all of a sudden you could save your progress in a game, and then there was more checkpoints, and then there
Here's the
was
one path you go down, and
yeah,
there is no
yeah,
deviating
linear
from
paths,
it.
regenerating health, like all of these things were starting to become more and more prominent. As particularly the regenerating health thing was becoming really prominent during this era. We have games coming out like Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare in this era, and that like games were definitely becoming easier. And then, as you said, along comes this little game called Demon's Souls,
Yeah.
which was
All right, we're
trying.
gonna screw it up, folks.
Yeah,
So
whatever.
just roll by it.
But essentially, it was trying to recapture a little bit of that difficulty from like the NES era of, your progress. Maybe you get to restart a level, but hey, there's no checkpoint. You have to do that whole level over again. And it had some, it tried to add a little bit of conveniences there, but Demon Souls was definitely probably, if you look at From Software's library now, it's probably the most unforgiving of all of them, and that's where they started, and it was, like I said, to kind of recapture that magic of when you beat a game, it was an accomplishment. I think if you beat an NES game, I almost don't care what it is. I
Be proud of
you
it.
have, yeah, you should be proud, because there's very few that I think are easy games to beat during that era, and that was by design because the games were very short, right? So you needed to get your money's worth. So if they weren't challenging, then you just spent like whatever, I don't even know what the cost is at that time, probably like $80, for inflation and everything. And yeah, if you just beat that game in 20 minutes, you'd be pretty sad. So there was something lost in the new era that I think Demon Souls brought back.
Oh, absolutely. Like I've never really made that connection in my head, but I think you're 100% right. Like the only difference between Demon's Souls and an NES game is the fact that you couldn't put passwords into Demon's Souls to get ahead a level or something like that. It really does go back to that old unforgiving style of NES game, especially with platformers. Like you need to be on your game and on your guard at all times, or you're not gonna make it. And then another thing that I think it really it really moved forward in a different direction than everything else was commitment in game. And this really became a staple of the Souls franchise, where a lot of games were becoming more forgiving. And this is something you even see today, where choice matters, but if you make a mistake, you can kind of we'll give you some leniency. We'll let you fix it in the long run. Not in those games.
No,
Those
yeah.
you F up, you use the wrong item, you put in the wrong stat point, you are committed to that. So it became a very in the ways that you had a more convenient experience opposed to those NES platformers. Demon Souls added its own anxiety almost to make up for it, to make sure that you were as on edge as possible through those things like commitment. So even though it was a little more forgiving in some ways, it found ways to become less forgiving tenfold, I would say.
Yeah. And the first time I actually heard about Demon Souls was Zero Punctuation. I don't know if you've ever watched him
Oh yeah.
before.
I
But
used to love him up until the point where he played Metal Gear Solid 4 on easy and complained about it and decided maybe this isn't for me. But hey, that's another
he's
story
still
for another
going.
day.
He's still going, by the
I
way.
know, it's very impressive.
I
Shout out to
recently, yeah,
Yahtzee, right?
yeah. I recently ran into like I just saw some of his videos on YouTube, and I'm like, he's still, he's still doing it, and I always enjoy just the great mix of a game review, but humor and the little animations that he does. But I remember watching his review of Demon Souls and him talking about, the difficulty and how unique it was. But watching that review, I was just like, at that time, I was like, no thanks. I think I'm good. Like, I don't think I want a game like that. So it was kind of like this series that I knew it was difficult, and it was something I didn't know I wanted. Like, I thought, I was like, no thanks. I don't want to be frustrated. I don't want to deal with it. So I still have yet to play that game. I kind of want to wait till I eventually get a PlayStation 5 and then I can play the remake on the PS5. But have you played Demon Souls? And if so, what was your experience?
I have. I was a early PS3 adopter, and I'm just trying to fact check something here while I just quickly. Yes, okay. So yeah, I was an early PS3 adopter, and around those times before like Uncharted and stuff came out, there wasn't a lot to play on the PS3. Like, I remember it was the Super Rub-a-Dub days where you played that, you played the Heavenly Sword demo over and over, hoping it was good.
Yeah, I begged Juan for him to give me his password so that I could play Super Rub-a-Dub. Because at that time, you could log into someone else's account and download the game and then go on your profile and be able to play it. Some hacks there to share downloads and stuff. And I was
Good
like,
times.
I need to play Super Rub-a-Dub.
Because it's all there is.
Yeah.
But I remember hearing about this Japanese game on like forums and stuff that I would go to called Demon's Souls, and I would keep checking it out. I would keep looking into it, and even though it came out in 2009 in both like Japan and North America, there was about a 6-month gap in between them. It released in February in Japan and October in North America. So I was like so excited to play it that I actually imported my copy of Demon's Souls just so I
Wow.
could check it out.
And you could play it in English?
Yeah, or I know.
Oh
but
my goodness.
that was a bit of a learning curve, but it was I'm trying to remember. Honestly, I can't remember. There might have been English in there or English options.
I would hope so.
But
With an RPG where there's a decent amount like your stats, like with where you're putting points into your stats, like it's
but you
kind of
have to
important to
remember,
know.
it is important, but you kind of have to remember that like the internet was in full force at this time,
Yeah.
so you could
Still.
look up and figure it out. I remember doing a lot of looking up things online with that, and the more I think about it, I think there might have actually been English options in there, so we might have been good. But
Yeah.
I remember checking that out, really enjoying it, importing that copy, and then like just being a bit ahead of the curve when it finally came to North America, and having a really good time with that game.
Yeah, and it's again like it's something I do want to eventually experience. It's probably, like I said, I would want to play the PS5 version, and I know Demon Souls being the most crude of its design, where you basically have your checkpoint at the beginning of the level, and no matter, and I know there's like a hub world, and you go out to one of the levels, and you have to make it basically all the way to the boss. And if you
more than
lose,
any other games, that game, there is runs in that game where you have to be on your A game on a run, and you are making a run to that
you have
boss.
to make it to the boss and hope you have enough health left over to to beat the boss. But I have heard you can get like not checkpoints, but shortcuts to make it a little bit easier to get to the boss if you make it further, etc. But still, as we move on to the next game in the Souls-like genre of Dark Souls, they started to make things a little bit more forgiving with the addition of bonfires
And I feel like we
yeah.
really need to say forgiving an asterisk
Yeah.
on this one because forgiving for most is not forgiving for these.
Yeah, but yeah, in the context of these games, it seems like as the series went on, in some cases they tried to make things a little bit convenient, more convenient in some areas, and that obviously culminates with the game we'll be talking about in the next episode, which is Elden Ring, where we see that to a much further degree. But Dark Souls is really where the series found its footing, and that's where that game really blew up and became a cultural phenomenon, and really just had a mark in gaming culture. And it wasn't a game that I played right away. It came out in 2011, but I have a close friend who really got into the series, and eventually I caved and gave it a shot, and I absolutely love the game. And I know, Keith, you played it as well a long time ago, but what are your fondest memories of Dark Souls?
Yeah, I played it when it first came out. Having that love for Demon Souls that I did, like this was the one that really like
Did you
hit
beat
North
Demon Souls,
America.
by the way?
I
Or
didn't.
okay.
I still haven't.
No,
So
not
maybe
trying to
one day.
dog on you.
Oh
I was
no,
just
believe me,
curious.
I take no shame in that. That was a hard ass game. Maybe one day, yeah. Like you said, I'd like to go back to it at some point. Maybe when I get a PS5 and play the remaked version and take another go at it. Especially now that I have like the Elden Ring high going on. But yeah, like having that fondness for Demon Souls, knowing Dark Souls was coming, and it being very close to a worldwide release. Like it came out in September in Japan and October in North America. I was like all in on it, ready to go. I bought it day one, and I have a lot of fondness for those first few hours of the game because in a lot of ways, even though it's like compared to the games that we got afterwards, Demon Souls was a very, I mean, Dark Souls. Now I've convinced. I'm okay.
We never have
Dark
to say
Souls
Demon
now.
Souls for the
Yeah,
rest
we
of the
never have to
episode.
say the episode. I've trained myself to just try to say it so much that now I'm just going to keep saying it. Dark Souls was a lot more of an open, quote unquote, open game than Demon Souls because it was very linear. Even though you had different ways to go on the path, you had your path and you take it. With Dark Souls, you had your main areas, you had your like hub area, but you could kind of go different directions. You weren't just like, you didn't have so much as a first level, and you could explore a little more. So being blown away by that, and then just finding all of the little nooks and crannies and secrets in the worlds, like I loved that so much. Like I'm, even though it's kind of everybody's first experience in Dark Souls, it's one of my favorites. It's finding that damn Drake sword. Like when you
Oh
go
yeah.
on off a little ledge and you're like, wow, this is a really strong sword. I feel so proud of myself for
Did
doing
you do the
that.
thing where you shot the arrows at the dragon's tail?
Just
Yeah.
to kind of kite him away enough that you could sneak by and
Well,
get
there was the little ledge, like the secret way to get the
Mhm.
Drake sword, where you went down to this area like below the bridge, and the dragon's tail was just hanging off, and you could
Yes.
just shoot arrows until the tail broke off, and you got the Drake sword.
Oh, okay. I never did it enough
Yeah.
to like break the tail. I just kind of kited away from it to get it. But yeah, nonetheless, still just like finding that Drake sword and then having that little bit of power at the beginning of the game, and then just kind of using that momentum to like work my way through, and that, and having not finished Demon's Souls ever, I have a lot of fond memories of the final boss of that game because that's really like when the bosses clicked for me, because there is something very special about the FromSoftware Souls bosses, where it is these little micro puzzles that you have to solve, and it comes down to 100% you being able to do it. And sometimes it takes time, sometimes it takes a lot of attempts, but eventually you get it. You get it, or you throw the game out a window and you never look back. And for me, the final boss of that game, it was Gwen, right? Gwen,
Yeah.
the Lord of Cinders.
Yep.
Like, that was just an awesome experience and one of my favorite in games ever.
Yeah, I think when people look back at Dark Souls, and I think the thing that still holds up the best is the world design. The way how the whole world connected together was unlike any other game. You know, that first moment where I think it was called the Undead Parish, where you take the elevator down and all of a sudden you're at
and then your
Firelink
frame rate drops at 3% to 3 frames.
But you're at Firelink Shrine and you hear that music that's still amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you heard that music, it was just like it was this somber music, but you knew you were like safe. Like you're like, all right, I'm home again. Like I can take a breather.
I can take a breath.
Yeah. It was just masterfully done. And yes, you could, Dark Souls, it was like there was clearly the path you were supposed to take. And in that way, it was kind of like a linear game, because if you're new to the game, there's really only one way to go. But the cool thing was, for someone who knew the game or on their second playthrough, there was a way different route that they could go. You could pick a different starting item so that you could totally avoid an area. I know my buddy hated Blighttown with a passion, so you get like that key.
Blighttown, that's the one I'm thinking of, that your frame rate would just get massacred.
It would absolutely die. So he always avoided it, and I was like, because he always avoided it, on my first playthrough, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do Blighttown. And I had the PC version, so my frame rate did not die a death. I was actually able to get through it, and it was a pain. It was a real pain, but I'm glad that I did it, because it was definitely a interesting experience, because there was all these different levels of it, and you were just aggroing these dudes left and right, and you had no idea where it was coming from, and it was it was crazy.
You get into this zone, right? Where you just there's 10 guys here, I'm gonna chop them all down one by one. Come at me, entire undead town.
Yeah. It was just an amazing experience, and it probably doesn't hold up as well today. There's a lot of conveniences that were added, and there's things like if you're locked onto an enemy in Dark Souls 1, you can only roll left, right, forward, or backward. You can't do a diagonal roll, which is something that people playing Dark Souls 3 and other games and Elden Ring, they're used to being able to roll in any direction. So to go back to Dark Souls is it's definitely an adjustment. And I know things with the amount of Estus flasks you had, which you would use to heal, was linked to the bonfires, right? You could buff a particular bonfire if you wanted more Estus flasks. Like you could buff it to 10 instead of 5. So that was a little bit tough. I know in Dark Souls 3 and stuff, you could just find the things to, much like Elden Ring, where you can have always that amount of Estus on you. But I do, just going into a bit of the design, I do love the concept of the healing potion that we always seem to have in these games, where it's yes, it's difficult, but we are always going to give you this little thing where you can heal multiple times in a battle, so that it's that little bit of charity that the game gives you of sure, this game's going to be brutally difficult, but you always get this heal here. And if you time it right, it will keep you in the fight longer.
And it gives you that little bit of strategy, right? Okay, I can go and get 2 hits in, but I know I'm going to have to heal after that, so I can get those 2 hits in, and eventually, I think it's one of the most pivotal design choices of those games, because that's how you learn. You learn through flasks, you learn through your ability to take some hits, really understand what the boss is doing, and then figure it out later. If you didn't have those flasks, you would be done. I think it would be just a daunting experience.
It keeps you in the fight long enough that you can learn, stay in it longer, and eventually you use less and less flasks, and it helps you. Yeah, exactly. It's all about learning that dance, and I love the design of, you can choose to have a shield or not a shield, and be able to parry if you want to go that route, or if you just want to dodge roll everything, you have that option, because every roll you have some form of invisibility or invincibility frames, right? People call them iframes, and that's just it. That's one play style. Or if you just want to be a tank and just buff up your shield and buff up your
Just
durability,
take all of the hits.
yeah,
Yep.
just block all the hits. Or if you want to have like your little buckler shield and you want to parry everything instead, the amount of options. Or you want to be a spellcaster and just shoot people from a distance and kind of be a glass cannon. The amount of options these games allow you to have is just it's really fun, and it creates like great conversations about like, oh, how'd you beat this boss? How'd you beat this other boss?
So to that, which direction do you usually lean into when you play these games?
So I think I like to go with a different play style every time. So for Dark Souls 1, I did a dexterity build, and I was using an Uchigatana, and I also got I think it was called like the Darkwood Grain Ring or something, where it would
Okay.
let you do like flippy stuff, like like your you know how you have like medium load, like with the amount of gear you have on, like if
Yeah.
you had a certain amount, if you were like a light armor, you could do, instead of just doing a fast roll, you would do like a front flip roll. It was like a better roll or whatever.
Okay.
You had to like do some weird quest line and then like kill an NPC that you normally wouldn't kill to like get the ring. But apparently
I didn't know that was a thing,
yeah,
but that sounds
apparently
cool
it's
as
busted.
hell.
It's some dude who's like way down near where like I forget what the spider lady is, or you know, she's kind of like,
I know which one you're talking
yeah,
about.
I forget
Don't
what her
remember the
name is, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's way down there. I think there's some like NPC
There's
down
somebody
there.
screaming at us right now.
Yeah,
Her name
yeah.
is this!
I just heard her name too the other day too, and I cannot, Quaylog or something. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Anyway, we had the expert design of Dark Souls. It was a huge hit, and then Dark Souls 2 comes along, and I think there are two types of Souls fans. It's like the people that started with Dark Souls and the people that started with Dark Souls 2, and the people which are, depending on where you started, you like the other game a lot more than the other. I feel like there's very few people that started with Dark Souls 1 and prefer Dark Souls 2. They're out there, I'm sure. But I went, after I loved Dark Souls, I went right into Dark Souls 2, and I was not as much of a fan. I got pretty far into the game, but I actually never beat it. I want to say I got like 3/4 into the game and then never beat it. Did you have any experience with Dark Souls 2?
I've honestly never played that game because this is the point where I hit my Souls fatigue. Like, having played Demons, having beaten Dark, like I kind of had my fill for a long time of that. So I've never touched Dark Souls 2, and it was part of my like Souls break.
Yeah, and I would say if there's one to miss, it's probably this one.
Probably that
Sorry
one.
to the Dark Souls 2 fans out there, but I remember you start with one Estus flask, which was brutal because like you
That
start the
sounds
beginning
awful.
of, yeah, it's the beginning of the game. You don't have a lot of health, you don't have a lot of endurance, and eventually, like pretty quickly, you do get more, but it is a rough start. And the other fundamental issue I had with the game is apparently there's like a stat, I think it's called like agility, that is directly tied to the amount of iframes you get on your roll. It's the
Oh,
only
weird.
game that does this. And that's the thing, is the game basically expects you to be leveling the stat regularly. So if you do not do that, you are in for a world of hurt. It's like basically like if you really level into that stat, the game starts to become too easy. And if you don't, it's like ridiculously brutal.
See, that's very unappealing
Yeah.
to me because when I go into these games, I usually go one of two ways. I go the great shield wall and just try and tank everything with a shield, or I'll go like a spellcaster. So thinking about that, I would have no reason to go into agility at all, really. So that would put me at a huge detriment in that game, and I'm not a
Yeah.
big fan of that or that design
Yeah.
philosophy of the flasks either,
I
because
don't
it
think
kind of goes against what I was saying earlier about being able to learn those bosses.
yeah, I don't think it was a great design choice. And I
Okay.
think a lot of
I
people
imagine there's
say,
a reason why it didn't happen
yeah, it never
again.
continued again. But I know there was also a thing where, like, until you got your souls back, like, you would be at half health. Like, there was some brutal stuff in that game. And yeah, it was a rough go, but I still made it pretty far. The boss design, the level design, I would say were not as good. They had an interesting element to it, though, where if you went through a section enough times, I think it was like 10 times or something, maybe 15, eventually those enemies that you killed would no longer spawn after you killed them like 15 times. And I remember,
Interesting.
yeah, so it was a little bit like, okay, we feel bad for you. You've done this so many times now. We're just going to have these guys not respawn. And I
But
remember there
on the
was,
other side of things, I don't that's also a weird one to me because like I'm again being like the tank, there are times where I like to turtle, and if I'm having some problems, maybe over level a bit and go through these things
yeah,
over and
it
over
kind
and
of
over
killed
again.
the whole grind spot thing. So you couldn't do that either. But I remember there was there was a boss that I struggled with. I don't think people nearly had the trouble I had with this, but it was a boss called the Smelter Demon,
Okay.
and he was basically always on fire. So it was like you were taking fire damage just by being next to him. So it's kind of like a
Mhm.
DPS race where you only had so much you could heal because your health is constantly draining, and it was just brutal. And what do you know? The path to him was completely empty by the time I beat him because I'd gone through that area so many times that the enemies were no longer spawning there. And
That's
I
amazing.
particularly remember that one
That must
being
feel
brutal.
bad at the same
Yeah.
time, just walking through that, like, oh,
So yeah,
here I
that may be
am.
the Souls game. I've heard the DLC for that game's fantastic, but I don't know if I'll ever make it through that game.
Yeah, I especially after Elden Ring, I don't see myself going back there. And hey,
Mhm.
and you know what? And if Dark Souls 2 is your favorite, all the power to you.
Yeah.
I would actually love to hear why in comparison.
Yeah. So then the next game to come out is a game I'm looking forward to playing. I've never touched it, but I own it and will play it sometime. Is Bloodborne, and I know you played a little bit of it. So if you
Hmm.
just want to share your thoughts on it.
Yeah, my experience with Bloodborne wasn't a very positive one, to be honest, because I mean, it you have to really like the parry gameplay of the Souls games because that it is a very parry heavy dexterity
Yeah, I know there's no
style game.
shields in the
Yeah,
game.
there's no shield, so this style of gameplay that got me through the other one was all of a sudden gone, and I don't know what it is. Like I just can't wrap my head around parrying in that game, so I choose to totally avoid it, and that's just not possible in Bloodborne. So I can totally understand how people have an amazing time with it, but it just wasn't for me. So I bounced right off of it. I own it, and again, that's one of those ones that maybe one day I'll check out. But I didn't have a good experience with Bloodborne, and I understand that that's a me thing.
Yeah. It's one I plan to go to because, like I said, I've had too many people tell me, even after playing Elden Ring, that it's still their favorite. So I feel like I owe it to myself to at least try and play the game. And I'm curious. I think there's like guns and stuff in it too, because I know it's taking place during like a
There is.
totally different setting, totally different lore, and all that.
That's
So
the
it
part that
sounds
makes
cool.
it so
Yeah.
parry heavy. Like you parry with guns in that game, and they're very
Yeah,
powerful.
and I think there's some element to like attacking to heal.
Hmm.
So that I think that's very cool. It's interesting. I'm kind of curious to just try it out. But another game that I guess we'll just touch on. I know it came out later, but I think is kind of a similar thing of like parrying is important is Sekiro, which
Hmm.
is probably the most different from all the Souls games in just in style, and it's kind of about like stance breaking and parrying and stuff like that. And I think there's I don't think there's quite the same, if any, like weapon choices. You're kind of like everyone kind of
Because
you're
it's
kind
a
of
game
locked
about
into.
samurais, right? You
Yeah,
need you're a sword. You don't have the gun samurai.
yeah,
At least not in that
I didn't
game.
play. I only got up to the first boss. Like it was when I just got a PS4. I got a PS4 pretty late. I got it in 2020. I just got my PS4. I got a bunch of games for it. I popped in Sekiro, made it to the first boss. That first boss completely just destroyed me many, many times. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna play The Last of Us because I need I need an easy game to just
You needed that
experience.
linear
Yeah.
experience that held your hand
I'm
a
like,
little bit.
I'll come back to this. But now having played Elden Ring, it's definitely one I'm gonna revisit. And one I actually just started playing, we can now move to Dark Souls 3. I am not too far in it, and I actually ended up going back to Elden Ring, but I do plan to go back to Dark Souls 3. But I see a lot of, where Elden Ring got a lot of its stuff from
Yeah. Oh
definitely from
yeah,
Dark
without a
Souls
doubt.
3. So if you want to quickly, have you played Dark Souls 3? And if so, what's your experience?
A very little bit of Dark Souls 3, where because of my poor experience with Bloodborne, I didn't actually touch Dark Souls 3 until Elden Ring came out because I was looking at Elden Ring and I thought it looked very cool, and through some humble bundle or some deal or something, I owned a copy of Dark Souls 3 for the PC. So I told myself, try this. And if you enjoy it, then maybe give Elden Ring a try, because you've had a lot of fun experiences with the Souls games in the past, but having it been Dark Souls, like we're looking at over 10 years ago at this point. I've changed in my
Yeah.
likes, I've changed in my styles. I wasn't sure if it was going to be for me. So I installed Dark Souls 3 and I had a blast with it. I only ended up getting about like 4 or 5 bosses in before I got to the point where, like, you know what, I'm just buying Elden Ring because I
Yeah.
really want to play this. But I had a great time with it.
Yeah,
And
it was like, Keith, you need to play Elden Ring. Like, play
and I
this
finally
game.
caved.
Yeah.
But the time that I did spend with Dark Souls 3, I had a very enjoyable time with it. Like, it was kind of unfortunate because we haven't really talked about it up until now, but multiplayer is such a huge part of these games. Not like playing with people or with your friends, but like the messages and stuff and that feeling of connectivity you have through the multiplayer aspects. Because I was playing the PC version, that was all gone because the servers, I think, are still down at this point.
Wow.
And so it was a little that took away from it a little bit. But like you mentioned, you really started to see the DNA of what would become Elden Ring in this game, and it is so good. Like the ability to allocate Estus flasks between
Yeah.
health and mana. Like that was really one of the first times where spellcasting became like a viable thing from the start, because a lot of times you kind of have to do your first playthrough and then go back as the spellcaster once you get a bunch of souls and you get a bunch of levels, unless you hate yourself deeply. But it became viable in Dark Souls 3. So having those little quality of life things, you really started to see it there, and being able to really try out any build you wanted and it be viable enough that you're able to get through the game. Like those were the things that I really appreciated about Dark Souls 3. And like you, I will probably go back and finish it just because there's no reason for me really not
Yeah.
to, having had a great time with it up until the point I started Elden Ring. Like I will go back and finish that
Yeah.
game. And that's
I
another instance where
I
I heard
will
the
as well.
DLC was fantastic.
I've heard that as well. And I got to like Cathedral of the Deep. That's as far as I got. So I didn't get too far into the game.
That's the
Uh,
big tree, right?
no, I beat the big tree.
Okay.
The Cathedral, I think you get to a point where after the Crystal Sage or whatever, you can go like 2 routes. And I
Okay,
went,
yeah.
yeah.
I know what you mean now.
So I'm
Right. So
just
it's a
there.
little bit past that.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a little bit past. I didn't get too far. Like I said, I think
Mhm.
I've only beaten like 3 main bosses. And yeah, I got to there. It was a little rough not having the jump button. I got real used to that from Elden Ring, so it's
Yeah.
very tough to go back.
That's my biggest fear about replaying these games. I don't know how I'm gonna do it without a
Yeah,
jump button
there's a lot of
anymore.
quality of life stuff that was tough to go back to, but having now kind of covered gone a little bit reminiscing about all the games. I think maybe just going back to talking about some of the cool, like, unique aspects about FromSoft games. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing I love about FromSoft games is just the obscure as hell platforming that they put into the game. Love it or hate it, it's
Obscure
so
is a word for it.
yeah, it's like, love it or hate it, it never feels like this is the way you're supposed to go, yet it's the way you're supposed to go. Like,
I know.
you think about, like, in Orlando, in the way it's like you see this big castle, and no, you don't just go straight into the castle. You get to do some weird stuff where you're like walking on these like little like connector pieces, and you're going through a window and you're in the top of it, and then you get to go up like another piece where there are those stupid archers that always want to knock you down. And it just always feels like it's not the way you're supposed to go. And I think it's really cool. And there's also, weird like rooftops you can jump on, and you always know you're going to find an item when you take that obscure path. And I love and hate some of just like you know what I mean? The weird platforming that they just
put like you're not supposed to be doing it. Like you're somehow breaking the level, but it was 100% intended, and it feels wrong every time.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever did in Dark Souls, the first Dark Souls. After some time, you can actually go back to the Undead Asylum, and like a crow will like take you back there, and you have to do the weirdest platforming to
this
get
doesn't
to
ring
it.
a bell,
Yeah,
so I'm gonna assume not.
Yeah, you actually, because like the area where you start, where you fight like the asylum demon and everything.
Yeah.
You can go back there later and get like a bunch of rewards and stuff. And I can't remember if there's a boss or not, but you have to do some weird platforming to get back to like that bird's nest so that it will like take you back. But it's like the most obscure platforming that you would never suspect. And particularly in Dark Souls, where like it's the jankiest like jumping ever, where you have to like click like L3 or something to while you're running to jump, and it's so terrible. And just the fact that they have you do that kind of stuff, it's really incredible. And obviously we see a lot of this in like Elden Ring, in the way that you're platforming and you're like walking on like little strips of parts of like a building and stuff, like in the underground cities. And
or like when you're on torrent trying to jump from platforms, and you hit X the wrong time, and you're just panicking trying to go back and forth.
It's just so unique, and you don't see any other game kind of do that. Like obscure, it's just like it's a cool like signature element of the series that I really like. It has its times where it's annoying, but for the most part I love it, because you feel clever when you really discover some of these hidden items, and you just start to learn like, oh, this looks like a weird path. I guarantee you there's something down there.
Yeah, you start to see the world a little differently, because now you expect there to be an item at the end of this thing, and it's not always there. They switch it up just enough that it throws you off sometimes, but you really start to appreciate every nook and cranny that they put in those games for that reason. Like there are times where like key story people are like you have to do that platforming to find them and stuff like that, and it's something that you could totally miss because it's about as non-linear as it gets. It's really cool. They are masters of level design that way.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that like some other developers outside like complained that there's no like quest log, let's say in like Elden Ring, and obviously you don't have that in any of their Souls games. And the fact that there's quest lines that a lot of them, if you don't look it up, you're never going to figure it out. But for the few people that do actually figure it out, it's this amazing reward. But how do you feel about the way that they design quest lines, where it's like it's so easy to miss, but and it's really obscure to figure out, and basically the fact that like you're almost not expected to ever like do everything in one playthrough? How do you feel about like that quest design?
It's a weird one, right? Because my initial reaction is to say that I think it's unfortunate, but having just beaten Elden Ring, I look at my experiences of stumbling onto a few of those quests, and it really is an incredible feeling. Like, it does suck that you can miss it, but if you find it, and it's really it's one of those reasons not to rush in the game, because that's the reason why you miss things in these games. You rush through levels, you try to get to the next thing, and you end up missing it along the way. So it's something that I would initially hate, but the more I think about it, the more understanding I am of it, I guess. And I don't mind it as much, because it's just another incentive to really appreciate this world that they've built and try and get as much of it as possible. There are frustrating examples of it where you're almost forced to look it up, because trying to progress the quest, there is no way that you would be able to figure
Yeah.
that out on your own. Like that part can be unfortunate, but it's not like they don't leave you aimless a lot of the times. Like, they're with I understand, yes, there are examples of the opposite, but they give you enough to say, like, okay, this is where you go, this is where I meet you, this is where you have to go. It gives you enough of the main story beats that you need to do in each game, that it is at least moving you in a certain direction. And for the type of games that they are, I really do think that it's okay that you don't see everything in one playthrough.
Yeah.
You're heavily incentivized from a gameplay aspect to play through the game multiple times. So why not have that ability to see something new during those playthroughs? There's really no reason, as I work through this in my head, there's really no reason to see everything in the first
Yeah.
playthrough, you know? So I guess it's good in that way, that it gives you something fresh as you try that new build that you wanted to do. You try that new that class type. You do that victory lap of having over leveled everything, and you just take it to town. Like, at least there is something new to do during that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I feel like, FromSoft, they're like, we want to design this game so that, everyone who wants to play through it can get through the main story without it being ridiculously obscure. But at the same time, I love the fact that they also like to cater to, like, we're going to make these really cool things that only like 5% of people are going to figure out. But for those 5% of people, it's going to be this unforgettable experience. And then
Absolutely.
everyone else can look it up and play through it that way. But for these small group of people that are really like gonna investigate and really try to figure this out, it's gonna be this incredible thing for them. And I love that. And
I know, same here.
it is
I
it
love
yeah, it's like a hit or miss thing, because it's like, yeah, there's a lot I have to look up about these games, because I'm like, there was no way I was ever figuring that out. But as you said, for second playthroughs, it gives you a reason to try all these different things on a second playthrough.
And it's fascinating. I'm going to avoid any spoilers here, because we'll save that for the next episode. But it's fascinating how the player base has adapted to that and learned through these games, like the diehard fans, that this is what they're supposed to do. Like, there's a secret ending in Elden Ring that has like, if you go off of like PlayStation trophies and Xbox achievements, there is like a hidden ending that has a higher completion percentage than the normal ending of the game, just because everybody followed a certain quest and got that hidden ending. So it's fascinating how people almost expect it now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, and given now that we're so many games into this style of Souls-like games, people kind of know the know what to expect a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I kind of love it. It's like, yeah, all the games are kind of, they have a lot of the same bones, right? Where people are like, oh, they're kind of just remaking the same game over and over, but there really is a uniqueness to each of the entries. The Dark Souls trilogy is obviously going to be a lot more similar because it's the same exact
It's a
series.
trilogy. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would say like that people can argue about Dark Souls 2, but they really haven't missed with any of these games. People love all of these games, and it's incredible how they've been able to basically keep one-upping themselves. And I don't know how they're gonna one up Elden Ring.
Yeah, that's
That's
going to
gonna
be a
be
toughie.
this one really went above and beyond. But
Yeah, I think just to touch on that a bit for a minute, I think that's because the bones of those games are so solid. Because when you talk about what makes the From Software games, every single one of them, that special experience, it really comes down to just how solid and how tight that gameplay is and how they've just mastered difficulty. And yes, they are all very hard games. I will not sit here and try and convince you otherwise. You will, every single one of them, you will put yourself through hell and you will hate yourself at least once along the way. But they're all fair. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like every
to some
all
degree,
of them.
some bosses are total BS.
Yeah,
you
so
know?
some of them, some of the bosses are crap, but eventually you learn them and you overcome them. You
And
look
there's
at them and
also, people talk about like a difficulty setting, like why isn't there a difficulty setting? There is a difficulty setting in the game. It's kind of like back in World of Warcraft, there was a raid called Ulduar where there was a button you could hit or some weird thing you could do in the fight to make it
you
more
made it
difficult.
harder.
Yeah, and you made it more difficult in almost all of these games. There is always options to make the fights easier, whether that's grinding levels or finding an item, or Elden Ring has the Ash summons. There's like built-in difficulty settings to make your experience. If you want to put the time in and you want to do the research, there are ways to make these fights more forgiving.
Yeah.
And also the whole get good thing.
Yeah,
Eventually
and
you'll learn the dance.
It's a meme, but you will eventually get
I mean,
good
I have it. You could barely see it in the video version, but there's a little cross-stitch thing my girlfriend made for me, and it just says "get good" on it.
That's amazing.
Because back when I lived with my buddies, shout out to her for making that. But back when I lived with my buddies in our apartment, and anytime someone complained about a game, we'd always just say "get good" and just piss them off even more. So, but so I think we covered a lot of the DNA of the Souls games and what really makes them magical, and I think that kind of will culminate in our next discussion, which is going to be
in one of the most magical games I've ever played.
Yes, in one of the most incredible games. Definitely the top candidate so far for Game of the Year in 2022. We will be talking about Elden Ring next week or whenever the next episode airs. I don't. But I did want to also just address, if people were wondering where the heck is the Pokemon episode, we said that was coming. I probably should have addressed this at the top of the episode, but
that's okay.
Hey,
editing. I'll just put it at the front, and don't worry about it.
Well,
I won't actually do that.
But yeah, for those wondering, Juan is unavailable for a little bit of time, so we didn't want to do the Pokemon episode or Pokemon series without him, so we decided to push that for a few weeks. Juan will be back soon, and we will continue that. But since Juan doesn't really particularly enjoy the Soul series, we thought this was an opportunity for us to talk about that. And then when Juan is able to come back, we are going to do our Pokemon series that we had already talked about.
If you remember, if you were a listener from the Cast of the Past days, and thank you, by the way, for still being here. We hope you're still enjoying it. We would have these almost half episodes where it would be more catered to the likes of two of us instead of the likes of the group. Like a lot of Ryan and I's old episodes were like about Warcraft and Zelda and the things that we both love. So this was a great opportunity for us to really just do a deep dive and eventually gush about one of our favorite games ever. And we could throw on a little tacky fun marketing trick and call it a side quest, because it's not one of our normal quests. We're taking some time and going on a little side quest for a few weeks that will culminate in a are we going into our Elden Ring episode saying like nothing is sacred, all spoilers on the table?
I think it's going to be
going all
full
out.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so
all
excited.
out, I mean, the game's been out for like 3 months now. I think it's okay to just say, hey, well, I mean, we'll give a spoiler warning, but we're just we're going all in on it. I think it's very rare that it doesn't happen often where you just play a game and instantly it's like on your top 10 or top 5 favorite games of all time, like immediately. But I think this is the case for this game for me. So that's what we'll be talking about on the next episode of Quest Rewind. So once again, thank you guys for joining us. Again, we will have the Pokemon series in a few weeks, so please hang on and look forward to that.
But
for those
don't unsubscribe. We're still here. We swear.
Yeah, we're still here. We're still here. And if you want to join us on the Discord and continue the conversation, we have a lot of great people on there, and it's always a great time to just talk collecting video games, talking about what games we're playing.
Yeah,
the link to that is in the description.
Yeah, it's been one of my favorite things over the few months that Elden Ring has been out, how we've all like collectively kind of played it together and discovered it together and are like trying not to spoil anything, but still have that discussion and trying to really
like,
just
this
walk
boss
that
is BS and have you tried this item? Yeah. So it's been a great time, and we're looking forward to do that. There's a lot of great games coming out this year, so I'm sure we'll be discussing a lot of those in the Discord, as well as maybe some of it on the podcast. But again, guys, link to that is in the description, and we'll be back next time gushing about Elden Ring, Keith and I, and then a Pokemon series in the future. So once again, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.